Go ahead, Michael.
Siyum is in the refuah shlema of my wife, Yehuda's Basra, Basra Chaya.
She should have a refuah shalem. Okay. Torah is very powerful. It has that effect on people. So definitely all of our learning should be in her merit to have a refuah shalem.
Amen.
So we're on the bottom of Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Beis, about two-thirds of the way down. We're starting at the first word on the line of Umi Amar Rabba Hachi. Obviously, we're in the middle of a sugya. The previous sugya that we learned, starting at the Gemara, was well, that's a biggie. Do we say that a shibud is created mida oraisa when certain interactions happen, meaning that the Torah has a demand on you that you have to now pay money? Or no, and only the rabbis required it. This is a machlokas between Ula, who says that whether or not you do a milva bishtar or a milva al peh, you have a real shibud deoraisa. However, according to Rabbah, the shibud is not deoraisa. The shibud is only derabanan. So how can Rabbah say that a shibud is only derabanan? Umi Amar Rabbah Hachi. Again, two-thirds of the way down on Kufay and Hamud Beis. How can Rabbah say that a shibud is not deoraisa in the case of milveh bishtar or milveh alpeh in either case? Amar Rabbah says that in a case of finding property after a father passes away, gavu mikarka, gavu karka yeshlo, that if after a father dies, karka comes in, somebody comes to the estate and says to the boys, "I'm so sorry your father passed away. Here's 100 acres that I owed your father." What happens with that money? So yeshlo, that means that it's divvied up with the sons, which means that the shibud is deoraisa. How, Rabbah, can you tell me 3 lines earlier that shibud's not deoraisa? Hooray, over here we see that it is. Now, gavu mos, ein lo, if money comes in after the father dies, that's not divvied up as part of the bechorah. But we do see that karka nevertheless is. Kasha, Rabbah, on Rabbah. So the Gemara says, maybe we made a mistake in our Gemara. That the first sheet in our Gemara that says that shibud is deoraisa, maybe that was really Rabbah, not Ula. And maybe the second sheet which says that shibud is not deoraisa, maybe that was really Ula, not Rabbah, and that would solve the Rabbah concern. Says the Gemara, that can't be, because V'ha'amar Ula says elsewhere, Davar Torah, Mida Oraisa, Baal Chov, Dine Biziboris. A Baal Chov, a person who's owed money, there's a Chov that's created on a Torah level that he is able to collect from Ziboris, which is the lowest quality of properties of the person who owes the money, which shows us that Ula is l'shitaso from the way our Gemara in fact presented it. You can't switch the shitas. You can't say that Ula is Rabbah and Rabbah is Ula, because Ula matches with a different Ula. Ula said elsewhere that Davar Torah Baal Chov Dine Biziboris. So therefore, what we're left with is a kashya. We're left with the shita that we closed off with yesterday, that Rabbah holds that there is no shibud deoraisa, even in the case of milveh bishtar. And we also have this new Rabbah that says that can't be true because gavu karka yeshlo, that if a father, after his death, karka comes in, it's divvied up as part of the typical Yerusha. So says the Gemara, Ella, Rabbah, time of the Bnei Ma'arava, Ka'amar. Rabbah wasn't saying his own shita. Really, Rabbah agrees to Ula. Rabbah was just saying back to Ula, I know what the Bnei Ma'arava hold. And they hold that there's no shibud deoraisa. But Ula, I agree with you. Now there's no stira in Rabbah anymore. The lay, lo svira lay. But Rabbah himself doesn't agree with the Bnei Ma'arava. He agrees with Ula. So now the machlokes pans out in the following way. Really, the Gemara presented it as a machlokes between Ula and Rabbah. That's a confusing presentation. It should be that Ula and Rabbah agree that shibud is deoraisa, and Rabbah, in explaining the Bnei Ma'arava, he says what the Bnei Ma'arava hold is that no, shibud is not deoraisa. And this machlokes extends to other Amoraim as well. 10 lines from the bottom. Kuf ayin hey amud beis. Rav Shmuel damri tarva milve al pei no gova lamina yoshim lamina lekuchos. My time is shibud lav deoraisa. Here we see Rav Shmuel. They hold like the Bnei Ma'arava. They didn't live in the Ma'arava. Rav and Shmuel lived in Pumpadisa. They lived out in Bavel. Nevertheless, they seemed to agree with the Bnei Ma'arava that shibud is not deoraisa. And Rav Yochanan and Rav Shimon ben Lakish Tamar Tarva Milva Al Peh Gove Bein Minei Arshim Bein Minei Lakuchos My Time Shibud deoraisa. So we see that this is a broader machlokes that has party lines, the Democrats and the Republicans. Some people hold that there is in fact going to be a shibud deoraisa, and others hold no, there isn't a shibud deoraisa. 5 lines from the bottom. Meisvei, hang on 1 second. We have a problem. If I take a shovel and I go into let's call it Central Park in New York, it's a public park, and I dig a hole there, which I'm not allowed to do. The nafal, listen to this case. The nafal alav shor v'harago. And you are walking by with your cow, because that's normal. Your cow falls in and kills the guy who's digging the hole in Central Park that he should not be digging. Allah Maisa, you who own the shore, you're putter from killing the guy who is digging the pit. Why? Why are you digging a pit in Central Park? My cow is allowed to walk there. You're not allowed to dig a hole there. When the cow tips over, falls in, and kills the guy digging the hole, putter. Not only that, v'lo od, ela she'imeis hashor. If this guy is digging a hole in Central Park and he should not be, and someone else's animal falls in and the animal dies, and the man dies. So now we have a dead man who shouldn't have been digging, and a dead cow who shouldn't have had a hole to fall into. Who pays for the death of the animal? The yorshim of the dead man. You should not have been digging that hole. And there's a shibud deoraisa that's created on your children. So let's make the case super clear. Chaim is digging a hole in Central Park. Shmelka brings over his cow. The cow falls in, kills Chaim, and the cow dies. Chaim's yorshim have to pay for the shore. The yorshim didn't do anything. Yeah, but the father did something. Why did the kids have to pay? Must be there's a shibud deoraisa. Kashya on all of the shitas that say that a shibud is not deoraisa. Yorshe abal chayav and l'shalom d'mei shor l'bayla. Unbelievable. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Law, Amar Rav, no, b'sha'amad bedin. We're not talking about a regular case where this was being adjudicated outside of Bezdin. This wasn't 2 guys talking in Central Park. This case was brought to Bezdin. Why does that matter? Take a look at a very important Rashbam. The Rashbam says 5-6 lines from the bottom. Dibra maslok sh'amad bedin. Listen to this. This is Lamdush. Demaise Bezdin kimilve b'shtar dami. Beautiful line and requires a deeper understanding that we don't have time for. When a Bezdin talks, it's as though it's a star. The power of a Bezdin is not dibur anymore. When a Bezdin paskins a shaila, it is kimilve b'shtar dami. And that's why the Gemara says that in this case, it wasn't just that Shmelka's shore fell on Chaim when Chaim shouldn't have been digging. They went to Bezdin. Shmelka went to Bezdin and said, look, I feel bad. The family's suffering. They lost Chaim. I understand. But Lamaisa, halachically, I'm checking my feelings at the door for a minute. It's not fair what happened. And Bezdin said, you're taka right. And the reason why there's a shibud deoraisa, that moment didn't happen at the pit. It only happened later in Bezdin. Wait 1 second. How can you say they were Amad Bidin? The guy died. What do you mean Amad Bidin? The 2 Baalei Din couldn't be there if he was dead. The Haharago Ktani. We taught the case that the guy died, that Chaim died. How can Shmelka go into Bezdin without Chaim? That's not a court case. You need to have both Baalei Din there. Says the Gemara, well, he was hurt but not dead yet. Omar Rav Ada bar Abba she'aso treifa. A treifa is a person who has an injury that will die within 12 months, at least by animals, that's the case. We assume similarly by people. If a person becomes a treifa, we assume that they are going to die, but he's not dead yet. They wheeled him in a wheelchair, feet up, IV bag dripping, and they are hearing Chaim's case, and that Chaim, what did you do? He said, you're right, I shouldn't have dug the hole. Okay, you're Yorshim. You need to pay. If you die, you're Yorshim. We're going to be chayav to pay Shmelka for the shore that fell on top of you and crushed your limbs. Wait 1 second. Of Nachman, Tani Tana Meis v'Kavro. We have another part of this story that says that the man actually died right there in the pit, and they buried him right there in the pit. So therefore, Chaim couldn't have gone to Bezdin. Says the Gemara, talk about a ukimta. This is like so far-fetched. But remember, whenever we see far-fetched cases in Shas, it's always to teach us the limits of the din. Don't get confused by the ukimta. It's to remind you the limits of halacha. Listen to this. Hasam de yasve daina apuma debira v'chayvuhu. happens to be the CRC Rabbanim were going on a walk in Central Park. They're standing there. Chaim's digging a ditch he shouldn't have been digging. Shmelka's cow walks by, falls in, kills Chaim, and the shore dies. They're like, guess what? Your Yorshim are chayiv to pay. Because Bezdin is Kimil Bishtar Dami. So there's a lot at play here. What did we learn halacha l'maisa? Here, the case is very extreme. The ukimta is irrational almost. It's so unreasonable. What we learn is that in the presence of Bezdin, even not in a Bezdin, their dibur is Kimil Bishtar Dami. Very, very important halacha. That brings us to the top of Kuf Ayin Vav, Amud Aleph. The final blot, I would dare to say the final Amud, because Kuf Ayin Vav Amud Beis is only 4 lines. No, we're close, almost the final Amud, but certainly the final blot. We've learned a lot. How do we paskin? Amar Rav Papa Hilchasa, Milve al Peh, if there's a loan that's only based on the verbal, Gove mina Yorshim, Ve'eno Gove mina Lekuchos. You collect from the Yorshim. Don't distract everybody. Don't, holy mama.
That's amazing.
His timing is.
So we timed it.
He timed it. He actually did time this. He said he'd be here by 9. So says the Gemara, top of Kuf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. Amar Papa Hilchas Malve al Kuf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. Hilchas Malve al Peh Gova Mina Yorshim. That if there's a verbal commitment, then you can only collect from Yorshim. But ve'enu Gova Mina Lekuchos. Why? Why the distinction? It's either binding or it's not binding. So says the Gemara. Gova Mina Yorshim. It's hard to focus. Did you smell this? Anybody else smell this? Losing my mind. He should have left it outside, but then the ravens would have attacked. We need by the Yorshim, you need to be able to collect from the Yorshim, because otherwise the loans would be limited. No one's going to want to do that. But when there's a milve al peh, there's no kol, and therefore by lekuchos it's not fair. Another sugya. We had said in our Mishnah, and this Mishnah is on the top of Kuf Ayin Hamid Beis, that if a man had a handwritten note, we pointed out in the top Rashbam on Kuf Ayin Hamid Beis that we were talking about where there was no other edus. We said Gova Minachasim B'nei Chorin, that there was kind of in the middle, you're able to collect from the B'nei Chorin. B'mine Rabba Bar Nasan Mei Rav Yochanan. Huchsak Savyado Bevezdin Mai. What if he had a henpeck on it? He had a confirmation of his document. Again, it's a handwritten document, right? This guy scribbles, I owe Ari $100. On its own, it really doesn't mean very much. But now it has a henpeck. I brought it into Bezdin. Bezdin's like, Phil, is this true? I say, yes, it's true. They put their little crimp on the paper. Shalom al Yisrael. Now I owe Ari money. This is fascinating. Okay, now there's a henpeck on the document that I owe Ari 100. But if I default, then he can only collect from my properties that are unused, my free properties, not ones that are owned by other people. Says the Gemara, why? Masiv Rami Bar Chama, as follows. This is a Gemara that we saw Maseches Gittin, God knows how long ago. Feels like a long time ago. Shlosha Gittin Psulin. There are 3 Gittin that are puzzle midrabana. This is fascinating. That means midoraisa. It works. But midrabanan, the Chachamim interrupt the process. The Chachamim were interrupters. That's what they did for a lot of halachos, as we know. You don't wear tefillin on the last day. Yontif v'chulei. That these 3 types of gittin are puzzle. And v'im nises, but if the woman were to remarry on this havlad kosher, because after all midoraisa was chal, so there's no mamzerus, even though midorabanan the get was puzzle. Midoraisa, she's actually divorced. So if she marries, she shouldn't do this. But if she marries, then midoraisa, then the children are not mamzerim. Be'eluhain, what are the 3 cases? And we'll see soon the conflicting shita after these 3 shitas is going to be what we need. He writes it barehanded with no witnesses. Yesh alav edim ve'ein bozman, or there are edim but there's no date. Yesh bozman ve'ein bo alei echad, or there's a date but there's only one signature, one witness, I should say. These are the 3 cases of gittin that are pasal midrabanan, but they are chal midoraisa, and because they're chal midoraisa, v'imni says if she marries and has another child, avlad kosher. The dissenting opinion, a third of the way down, kufayin vav manav, Blazer Omer, afal pisha ein olav edim el shenasna olav bifnei edim. Even if there are no edim, but it's presented before edim, so then kosher v'gova minachasim. Which ones? Mishubadim. So wait a second. We just said the din before that in a similar case, you're gova minachasim b'nei chorin. Why over here are you saying differently? Shiny hasam demishas ksivu deshava nafshet. So the Gemara here gives an ukimta as well, that the document that was presented in this case of Shlosha Gittin Psulin was different. That case was presented in Bezdin. The guy went into Bezdin and said, I hereby wish to divorce my wife, whatever the shtar actually said. Don't quote my words. So because he wrote it in Bezdin, it had a higher level of seriousness, and therefore you're govim in chasim mishubadim. Masha'enkin, in the previous case, the guy was sitting at home and he was in his diary. He's like, I want to divorce my wife on this date and this time. My name is El Pinchas Ben, and you go through the whole thing, right? So that's a lower level, right? My wife had a client who had written something in her journal that was scary sounding, but it wasn't real. And she wrote it, but it was just venting. It wasn't real by her. And they did an assessment. They made sure she was safe. There's a difference between, writing a manifesto and like writing your journaling. It's different. They're different. So the Gemara is distinguishing. If I'm sitting at my kitchen table angry at my wife and I said, I want to divorce her, that's not as binding. And therefore, to whatever level of chalos, it's chal to some degree, but I can only collect from nechasim b'nei chorim. But here, it's even from nechasim mishubadim. We spoke about an arev hayotze la'achar chitum shtaros, very, very detailed. The Gemara says, where did the guy sign? Did the guarantor sign before the signatures or after? Who knew that it would make such a difference? I wouldn't have thought, because I'm a balabas. The Gemara says, Amarav, kodem chitum shtaros. If the signature of the arev is before the witnesses' signatures, govim minachasim mishubadim. Wow. La'achar chitum shtaros. But if the arev signed afterwards, no. Govim minachasim b'nei chorin, lower level. Then you can only collect from unused properties from the owners. And Zimnin Amarav afilu kodem chitum shtaros and govim minachasim b'nei chorin. He conflicts on himself. He says sometimes Rab would say something differently. What is this? This isn't a game. Rab would sometimes say X and sometimes say not X? That doesn't make sense. Kasha de Rava de Rab. The Gemara says lo kasha. Sometimes in Gemara we say every letter counts. So here the letter Vav is going to be the game changer. Look at this. The Gemara says ploni lo kasha ha de kasabe ploni arev. In one case it says Rab is the guarantor, and ha de kasabe u ploni arev writes the whole get, and in regards to this get, and Rab is the guarantor. Now, Rabbi Yochanan amar echad ze ve'echad ze eino gove el min nechasim b'nei chorin. I don't care if you have the Vav or not. No matter what, it doesn't matter. Now, the difference between not having a Vav and having a Vav, when there is no Vav, it says, here's my get. Rab Cohen is the guarantor. Versus, here's my get, and the guarantor for this get is Rab Cohen. They're different. One could be two separate statements, and the other is definitely one statement. The Afagav de Kasa Be Uploni Arev. Rabbi Yochanan argues even when it says and Rab is considered to be that person. Masiv Rava, wait 1 second. How can you, Rabbi Yochanan, ignore the letter Vav? I know in another place you wouldn't have done that. Masiv Rava, we have a Brisa. It's actually a Tosefta Maseches Gittin. Edem achasum al she'ela shalom beget pasol chayshin and shem al she'ela shalom chasmo. Let's say that I write a get, and I also say, by the way, please send my warmest regards to your neighbor. Love, Phil, and then the Edom sign. So there, V'amar Rabbi Abo, Lididi Mifresh Leminei Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan himself said, if it said She'elo, ask for my friend, please, puzzle. But U She'elo, kasher, the Vav, and one unit of writing or two separate units of writing, kasher. So it says the Gemara, therefore kasha on Rav Yochanan. Here we see the Vav matters, and before you said the Vav doesn't matter. You can't do that. You got to stay consistent. Says the Gemara, Hachanami dekasa ploni arev. Says the Gemara, really over here, what we're talking about is where it says ploni arev. There is no vav in this case. If so, that's the sheet of Rav. Then you agree. Now you agree that the vav matters because you changed the case to no vav, and all of a sudden that's Rav. Says the Gemara, you're right. I agree. Let's take back the 10 lines. Ema v'chein amar Rav Yochanan. One little vav. By the way, ironically, the v'chein, the vav, that was what was missing initially. It shouldn't have been the Rabbi Yochanan. It should have said v'chein. They really agreed and hold of the same thing. Last piece of Gemara in the Masechta Ma'asu V'Lifnei Rabbi Yishmael v'chulei. There's a story that came in front of Rabbi Yishmael. You may recall that in the Mishnah, toward the end of the Mishnah on the top of Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Beis, there was a machlokas between Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yishmael. The other way, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. There was a machlokas between them. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Barachan Rabbi Yochanan Afal Pisha Kiles Rabbi Shmuel es ben Nanas. Even though Rabbi Shmuel prayed, remember he said, "Oh my gosh, if you ever want to learn Mamanis, you want to become a Talmid Chacham, learn Mamanis and learn only from ben Nanas." So even though Kiles means to praise, even though Rabbi Shmuel praised ben Nanas, Halacha kamoso like Rabbi Shmuel. We don't agree like with Ben Nanas. We don't agree. Ibailahu, the Gemara says, in a real case of Bechanuk, in a real case, if I see, Ruvain strangling Levi, Mali Omar Rabbi Shmuel, what would Rabbi Shmuel say in such a case? So Tashma, let's see what he would say. Damar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Chalukaya Rabbi Shmuel, Af Bechanuk. He wouldn't hold of cases, cases that were non-death cases. That's for sure. Rabbi Shmuel would disagree with Ben Nanas. But even in a real case of Chanuk, he would agree. Halacha kamoso and halacha kamoso tashma. What would in fact be the din? How do we paskin? Tashma dechi asa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan Chalukai Rabbi Shmuel af b'Chanuk ve'halacha kamoso af b'Chanuk. That even if it's a theoretical case of threatening but not death, I'm going to kill you if, and it's not killing. I'm going to beat you up if, and then the Arev intercedes and says, I'm in. I'll take care of it. Rabbi Shmuel would hold that person's chayiv. The same is true, not only if it's a verbal threat, but even if he's actually strangling someone, he holds that the Arev, the guarantor, is now chayiv. And Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Chanuk v'kanu miyado mishtabed. According to everyone, if a guy was being strangled and there was a kinyan that was made, kinyan sudar, I'm in, says the Arev, I'm in, I want to save this person's life, everyone would agree. What does this teach us? Nechlal, 2 lines from the bottom, Da'arev ba'alma lo by kinyan. I can see over here in the case of Chanuk, in the case of strangulation, that we do need to have some type of kinyan. That means that in regular cases of arbus, you don't need to have a kinyan at all. Upliga de Rav Nachman. This is not in agreement with all the Amoraim. To Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was of the opinion. Final turn. To Amar Rav Nachman. Arev de Bezdin hu de lo by kinyan. It's not really true. He made a distinction. Rav Nachman held that if there was a guarantor who was in Bezdin, that doesn't require a kinyan. Because he's in Bezdin. And we'll explain why in a moment. However, in general, a kinyan is required. We don't seem to hold like Rav Nachman. An Arev, when the money's being given over, I'm going to lend money to Ari, and Michael is going to be the guarantor. Michael says, I agree. If at the time of the transaction, the Arev is there, but matan mos, lo bai kinyan. Then Michael doesn't have to do a kinyan to become an Arev. However, achar matan mos, if Michael only chimes in after I give over the money, then Michael can't be my guarantor for Ari. You're after the fact. Then you're going to need a kinyan. Arev de Bezdin lo by kinyan. Why would it be that a guarantor who's standing in Bezdin doesn't need a kinyan? Because, what a rationale. The fact that Bezdin trusts in this guy, in Michael, to be the guarantor, Bamar u'mishabed le. Therefore, it's considered to be a kinyan. Why that works requires Rishonim, which we're not going to learn right now. So maybe one day when we do Amud Yomi. Chanuk, that was the case that was mentioned in Kufay and Hayam with Beis. And that case was if a guarantor jumps in, you have Reuven is strangling Levi, and Yehuda says, don't kill him, I'll pay his debt that he owes you. Don't kill him. So that was what the Mishnah was talking about. Is the Arev chayiv to pay, yes or no? Machlokes Tanaim. That was the case that was going on over there. And here we just nuanced it a little bit more because the case in our Mishnah was Lav Dafka Chanuk. It could have just been, if you don't pay me, I'm going to kill you. And Michael's like, no, don't worry. If he doesn't pay, I'll pay. So how binding was that? And we hold like Rabbi Shmuel that it's in fact binding. Hadron Allah get pashu to sleek Allah Maseches Bava Basra. Hadron Allah Maseches Bava Basra Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Bava Basra Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Bava Basra lo sisna sheminon lo ba'alma hadain lo ba'alma da'ase. Hadron Allah Maseches Bava Basra Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Bava Basra Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Bava Basra lo sisna sheminon lo ba'alma hadain lo ba'alma da'ase. Hadron Allah Maseches Bava Basra Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Bava Basra Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Bava Basra lo sisna sheminon lo ba'alma hadain lo ba'alma da'ase. Yorotzom lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoseinu she'tehei sorasecho manu seinu b'olam hazeh usei manu l'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achoy bar Papa, Abamari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rochish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu es divrei Torah b'finu u'b'fifios ha'mecha beis Yisrael v'niyeh kulanu anachnu v'tzetzoenu v'tzetzoei ha'mecha beis Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomodei sorasecha v'oyevaitecha kimeni mitzvosecha ki l'olam hili libi samim b'chukecha leman lo yivosh leman lo eshkach pikudecha givamchi yisani baruch ata Adonai lamedeni chukecha amen 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 selav ha'ed. Odim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'le'avosenu ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש, ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי קרונוס, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים. אנו משכימים לדברי סורה, והם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים והם עמלים. אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר, והם עמלים והם מקבלים שכר. אנו רוצים והם רוצים. אנו רוצים לחיי עולם הבא, והם רוצים לבאר שחס, שנאמר בתהילים תורדים לבאר שחס, אנשי דמים ומרמה לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך. ירצומי לפניך אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתנו לסיים מסכת בבא בסרה, כן תעזרני להשכיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים, ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי סלמון תורתך ביבוא, וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לי ולזרעי, שלא שמו שהתורה מפי ומפי זרעי וזרע זרעי עד עולם. ותזכיים בי בסלחך תנחה וסח בשוכבך, ישמור חוקיך, והקיצוץ היא ששיחך. הביא ירבו ימיך ויוסיף לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינו בשמאל אושר בכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את שמו בשלום. גדל ויסקדש שמי רבו, ילמה דיהו עשי דיסקדסה, לחיים יסי לעסקן יעשון לחי עלמה, ולמבני קרתי דירושלים ולשכללה הקלה בגבי, למפר פולחנה נוכרה מן ערה ולעשבה פלחנה דשמיא לעשרה וימלך קודשה ברכו במלכוסי ויקרא בחייכון ובימיכון ובחייכו בית ישראל בגלו בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. היי שמי רבו מבורך ולנו יסברך וישתבח ויספור וישמע וישנשא ויסהדר ויסעלה ויסהלל שמך קודשה ברכו לילה מקור בחסה ושיר סעד ושבחסה ונחם עשה דמירם ביעלמה ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנו ועל תלמידיהון ועל כל תלמידיהון ועל כל מאן דעסקים באורייתא דבעשרה הדין ובכל עשר ועשר יהי להון ומכון שלמה רבה חינה וחיסה ורחמים וחיים אריכין ומזוני רוויחי פורקנה מן קרב אבונו וישמעיה ורב אמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמרו אמן. עושה שלום אמרמה ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמרו אמן. Mazel tov. Baruch Hashem, what a short Masechta.